cases. We now apply adhesive to the facial and lingual surfaces of the teeth. We can use a 5th generation adhesive. We can use the adhesive from a 4th generation. When we use a 5th generation adhesive, it's important to air thin and evaporate the solvent off of the adhesive. With a 4th generation, we just want to air thin it. We do no light curing until after we place the composite. Make sure you cover all the etched enamel surfaces. We're now going to stabilize the facial by placing composite on the facial surfaces. We're going to take a PFI to minimize the excess in these areas and establish an aesthetic looking result by creating separation between the teeth. We barreled into the interproximals with the diamond. So we're taking a PFI, here we're taking a burnisher to adapt it to the etched enamel surfaces. We'll then go with the PFI and we'll place it so that we're creating basically separation between the teeth so that the teeth look individualized. With the teeth looking individualized and with the excess composite removed, we'll then be ready to light cure. This step is really very critical so that the teeth don't shift and move when we place the splint on the lingual surface. If we don't place this facial composite, the teeth will shift and torque, the splint will fracture and prematurely fail. Also, by sealing these interproximal embrasures, we're not concerned about interproximal decay forming in these areas. We make sure that the enamel's covered. We'll be finishing these areas later, but we try to remove as much excess as we can on these surfaces. Notice on the distal of the canine we have a matrix strip in place so that we get no excess composite onto the mesial of the premolar. We then light cure each tooth for 10 to 20 seconds on the facial surfaces. We do no light curing on the lingual. We place composite into the lingual, into the 2 class 3 preparations, and the channel of the Ponte. We have placed adhesive already on the lingual edge surfaces. We're going to place the composite in the class 3s and the channel so we can place the smaller strip of ribond into that area. We also then can place composite on the entire lingual surface. The short piece of ribbon is placed in the 2 class 3 preparations and the channel. We want to closely adapt it to the surface of the teeth. All fiber reinforcement procedures for bridges and splints should have the fiber as closely adapted to the tooth as possible. We use a burnisher or a plastic filling instrument to get our adaptation. We make sure it's pushed into place. We then sandwich the double thickness of fiber with composite over the first fiber. We then can place the longer piece of fiber to create our splint. And we're looking at the fiber embedded in the class 3s and the channel. Composites placed over the fiber for the first smaller piece of ribbon THM, and now the longer ribbons placed for periodontal splinting into the composite. We place it and adapt it. We position it into place with a pair of cotton pliers. We can use our PFI. We can use a burnisher. Whatever instrument works best in your hands. We're placing it in the transition between the middle third of the tooth and the incisal third. We're adapting it as close to the enamel surfaces as possible. We want to have a thin film of the ribond against the enamel surface. We can place some additional composite over the ribond. We don't want the fiber sticking out of the composite. We want the fiber completely covered by the composite. This is a nanohybrid composite. Some people use flowable composites for this procedure. Both types of composites work well with this technique. We want to squeeze the ribond, make sure that we place it interproximally, and is adapted as close to the interproximal and lingual surfaces as possible. This thin film gives us greater strength. Here you're seeing an example of adaptation. I'm using my plastic filling instrument to push it into the interproximal embrasure areas so that I have that thin film, that we're following the curve of the teeth. Following the curve of the tooth, a curve is a very strong structure, creating an archway of the ribbon fiber on these teeth. We then light cure each tooth for 20 to 30 seconds. Keep in mind, the light's not just penetrating the composite and the adhesive, but also the ribbon itself. Once we've light cured all the lingual surfaces, we then remove the matrix band and the polyvinyl siloxane blockout. Because the polyvinyl siloxane is chemically not compatible with the composite, it'll pop out between the teeth. Usually I'm using a scaler or a interproximal carver to push it out, usually removing it from both the facial and the lingual surfaces. And with the blockout removed, we're going to have minimal finishing in those gingival embrasures. You can see the anatomic blockout. Before using this blockout technique, finishing and polishing was much more difficult. There was much more time required. Composite finishing and polishing with finishing diamonds, finishing discs, finishing burrs. I prefer using these extra thin Softflex discs on the facial surface to marginate it against the enamel, to shape the incisal edges of the teeth so that I have a well-adapted surface. I then go in, and here I'm using an enhanced finisher, the cup shape, to marginate the composite and polish the composite even further, trying to minimize the excess, checking to make sure the margins are flush to the enamel using an explorer. I'm finishing and polishing the lingual surfaces as well, making sure that none of the fiber reinforcement material is sticking out, is perforated through the composite. After my preliminary finish and polish, I inspect to make sure the fiber's embedded. If I see areas of exposed fiber, I can cover them with a flowable composite and then light cure that flowable composite resin and then polish those surfaces back up. With the flowable in place, where I've placed it, I'll light cure those areas for 15 to 20 seconds. Once I've completed all my finishing and polishing, and I've completed my light curing, I inspect the bridge and remove the dental dam. For this case, I still need to shape the incisal edge, but we've got a strong and durable splint. 1 month after placement, we did some aesthetic modifications, and we've gotten an aesthetic result and a functionally strong result where we've both reduced the mobility and we also replaced the missing incisor. We can use fiber reinforcement for periodontal splinting, immediate bridges, reinforcement of endodontically treated teeth, reinforcement of cusp replacement composites, long span provisional bridges, provisional implant bridges, acrylic resin night guards. All of these are uses for the fiber reinforcement material.